Where were you born, Clifford?
Portsmouth, Ohio.
Ohio?
I'm 50 years old. Out of that 50 years, for the better part of 46 of those years, I've been involved with UFOs, although at the beginning I didn't know that that's really what I was involved in. As I went through my childhood into my teen years, I had strange events that took place. Eventually I got into the military, and I found out that once I got in the military, these events would follow me also. In order to try to seek answers as to the events that happened in my life, I started to collect a large volume of documentation on the UFO phenomenon. I have a strange story to tell. The story is unlike a lot of what you hear, but it's my story, and I know it to be true because I lived it. I can't say who's right and who's wrong in the field. I'd like to see everybody that's involved in UFO research to have one vision, and that vision is ultimately getting the truth out to the American public. That would mean that every UFO researcher would have to put their differences aside, not have their own agendas, their own concept of what the truth is, but to seek out the truth that can be documented, that has the evidence, the strong evidence there. Over the course of the years of the UFO investigation, as it was officially handled by the United States government stipulated that there was only one agency involved in those investigations, that being the U.S. Air Force. Actually, in the beginning, it was the Army Counterintelligence Corps that handled UFO investigations. We officially got started on an official program as a result of the Kenneth Arnold sighting of June 24th, 1947. The CIC, Army Counterintelligence Corps, was involved in those investigations, and it would remain so until the Air Force became a separate entity in 1947 as a result of the National Security Act of 1947. In 1947, September 17th, 1947, the National Security Act came into play. September 23rd, 1947, the Army Air Corps became the United States Air Force. Those people who were in CIC immediately took over the investigation of UFOs. With the large number of UFO reports coming into the U.S. Air Force, it was seen that there was a necessity to have a clearinghouse, if you wish, to receive UFO reports and give some contention that they were getting official notice. The Air Force then set up what was called Project Sign. Project Sign came into existence January 22nd, 1948. The press would refer to it as Project Saucer. This was to protect the code name Sign from the American public, as the code name itself was classified. In February 1949, the report was released on Project Sign, stipulating that all UFOs could be explained away by hoaxes, illusions, or misidentification of known phenomena or aircraft seen under unusual conditions. The Air Force released this report knowing fully well that it was incorrect. This did not stop the influx of reports coming in to UFOs, or coming in to the U.S. government, to the U.S. Air Force dealing with UFOs. Getting all these reports, they were finally forced to acknowledge that Project Sign did not die in February 1949, but that it continued. The name had been changed by virtue of Sign being compromised. They changed it to Project Grudge. Thus, it would remain Project Grudge until 1952, at which time it was then identified as Project Blue Book. It would continue as Project Blue Book until its demise in December 1969, at which time they stated we were no longer investigating UFOs. However, this was not to be the end. What was unknown to the American public was that behind the scenes, there was a much more broader investigation of UFOs dealing with more reliable sightings. The military sightings, the sightings that was being reported by astronomers, the sightings that was being reported by scientists. These had a code name too. I don't know what it was from all the way back during the time that we had the investigation into UFOs, beginning with the Foo Fighters during the Second World War, when we definitely took an interest. But that's when we officially got involved in the so-called UFO phenomena. The Foo Fighters that was being seen by our pilots and the Axis powers alike were something real, something that showed intelligent control, that took evasive action. There was a great desire to find out. The United States Army, under the auspiciousness of General MacArthur, created what was known as the United States Army Interplanetary Phenomena Research Unit. In 1943, MacArthur was able to ascertain from his CIC people that definitely there were interplanetary craft visiting our planet that was observing that world event at that time we called the Second World War. And if that they proved to be hostile, we would have a great dilemma. This fact that I've just told you has never been made public to the American people. They know of the Interplanetary Phenomena Research Unit, but they don't know actually when it began. We know also from the release of documents from the FBI that Blue Book was never in charge of anything. Very quietly, behind the scenes, from the beginning, from 1947 to 1953, January of 1953 to be precise, OSI, Office of Special Investigations, those elite people who came over from the Army CIC, who were doing the initial investigations, were the ones that were in fact monitoring the UFO situation there at Wright-Patterson. Blue Book would get watered down reports, particularly of the really good, significant reports. In January 1953, a unique event took place. The United States Air Force created a very elite unit. This unit would be known as the 4602nd Air Intelligence Service Squadron. General Burgess suggested to Captain Ruppelt that they had a unit, a very unique unit, that was specifically designed to go out and do field investigations. That if this unit was permitted to do the UFO investigations, we would finally be able to get to some pay dirt. Ruppelt, in his book, his 1956 book entitled The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects, alludes that he was the one that suggested to Burgess that this come about. The Blue Book files dealing with the AISS, the Air Intelligence Service Squadron files, clearly show that it was Burgess that made this overture to Ruppelt. The 4602nd had a wartime mission. The wartime mission was the field exploitation of downed enemy aircraft and personnel and the exploitation of enemy documents. It had no peacetime mission. Now, at its conception, it now had a peacetime mission. That peacetime mission was to do the field investigations of unidentified flying objects, to interact with those investigations of military personnel, of highly trained observers, such as scientists, astronomers, personnel who were considered highly credible observers, who knew what they were talking about as far as giving accurate data in the observations they made. They also created a new program, unknown to Project Blue Book. Every UFO report going in to the Air Material Command, later to be called the Air Tactical Intelligence Center, first went through a clearinghouse. Operation Blue Fly was now in full operation. The intent of Operation Blue Fly was the immediate field exploitation and recovery of any enemy or presumed enemy craft that went down in the continental United States or friendly territories overseas, as well as the field exploitation and recovery of advanced technologies. This included the recovery and field exploitation of those items which we called unidentified flying objects. So it would continue well after the end of Project Blue Book. Blue Book ended, as I said before, December 1969. In 1987, the Air Force was to acknowledge that that Operation Blue Fly had, in fact, had its name changed. Moondust, also, which was the overall field exploitation, also had its name changed. When we finally got Congress to ask about these two specific projects, even though I had them under appeal which means by law, the classified documentation had to run the gauntlet of the appeal action, that they were not to be destroyed, they were not to be done away with. But as virtue of Congress asking the hard questions, what about these files as they pertain to UFOs, the Air Force was to come back and state that all their documentation on these particular operation and project, Operation Blue Fly, Project Moondust, had been destroyed. The intent of destroying those documents, and I charge the Air Force with this now, and the small nucleus within the intelligence community, I charge them with destroying those documents to keep the people who were investigating what happened here at Roswell from becoming public. Because within those documents you would learn of U.S. Air Force Detachment 35. You would learn that the U.S. Air Force Detachment 35 collected data, pictures, reports, photographs, physical evidence. That in 1947, that information was gathered. Sometime between 1947 and 1952, those files were transferred to Detachment 35. In short, Roswell was the scene of at least 2, possibly more, UFO crashes. Those crashes were not of Project Mogul or weather balloons. The Air Force had in its possession in 1995, when Schiff himself was asking for the information as to what happened here, and they were lied to, as was the General Accounting Service, that they didn't have any documents. They had a complete file folder. We have the cover of the listing of those projects that the Detachment 35 was involved in. Roswell was one of them. Clearly indicating that they had the file. I personally have seen some of that information. What happened in July 1947 here in Roswell was, in fact, the crash of 2 or more unidentified flying objects, which later were not to be unidentified. We positively confirmed that they were interplanetary craft from some other place within our within our galaxy. They did not originate in our solar system, complete with bodies. We recovered the debris. We recovered whole craft. They have reverence for their dead. I can tell you that we did not maintain for too awful long possession of the bodies. In one instance, there were 5 entities. 3 were dead. 1 was seriously injured that died later as a result of its injuries. 1 wasn't all that bad as far as its injuries went. I cannot confirm whether it was returned alive or dead. I do know that we had a problem because medication, as we understand it, doesn't work for them. Food that we eat that may be healthy for us was poisonous to them. So synthetics had to be applied. And how that went about, I don't know, because I wasn't in a position to have a need to know. What I'm stating right here, I know for a fact to be true, simply because I lived it, I worked with it.